All right, today our attention shifts back to Joseph, and in Genesis chapter 39, Joseph is now, having been sold as a slave, he is now down in Egypt, in the house of a fellow named Potiphar. So picking up in Genesis chapter 39, our text says, "Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance." Now the term Ishmaelites and Midianites are interchangeable. Ishmaelites, it refers to their heritage. They are descendants of Ishmael. They are descended from Ishmael. Midianites refers to where they lived. They lived in the land of Midian. So sometimes you're going to read of this group, they're the Midianites, sometimes they're the Ishmaelites. It's sort of an interchangeable term referring to the same group of people. Now we're told here that Potiphar was an officer of Pharaoh. He was the captain of the guard. He was the chief officer of Pharaoh's personal bodyguards. And this is the man who purchases Joseph from the Ishmaelites. The Lord, something we're going to read multiple times in this chapter, the Lord being with Joseph is something that is emphasized. It appears in verse 3, in verse 5, in verse 21, and verse 23. This is a pretty short chapter. And we're reminded 4 times that God is with Joseph. The Lord is with Joseph. So Joseph lives in Potiphar's house. Rather than a separate place for slaves or for servants, he actually stays in Potiphar's house. Now, the Lord being with Joseph is the reason for the favor shown to him and the reason for his success. Now, Potiphar is likely a very wealthy and a very powerful man. He's a highly trusted person by Pharaoh. He is the captain of Pharaoh's personal bodyguards. This would be like, I guess for those of us in the United States, this would be like the head of the Secret Service is basically what this is. Someone who you have to have, who is a very powerful individual, very close access to the most powerful person in Egypt. So very likely a very wealthy man. And Potiphar elevates Joseph to be essentially the manager over everything he has. Joseph essentially becomes the chief operations officer of Potiphar's household, of all of Potiphar's business. Potiphar sees that the Lord was with Joseph in everything that he did, and the Lord blesses Potiphar's house for Joseph's sake. Potiphar doesn't even give a second thought about anything under Joseph's management. In fact, it seems like, from what the text says, that the only thing that Potiphar got involved with was what he wanted to eat. Other than that, he pretty much lets Joseph run everything else. The only thing he cares about, the only thing it seems that he sort of gets involved with the decision-making on is the food he wants to eat. So Joseph is running Potiphar's household, basically, and Potiphar's totally fine with that because Potiphar sees Joseph does a good job and that the Lord is blessing Joseph. The section we read ended with a statement that's kind of a lead-in to what's about to happen. But the text tells us that Joseph is a handsome man. So he's successful, he's very handsome, and that is going to lead us to where the rest of this chapter is going. It says, "And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, 'Lie with me.' But he refused and said to his master's wife, 'Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her or to be with her. So, after a time, Potiphar's wife wants Joseph to sleep with her, but Joseph refuses. Joseph replies to her that Potiphar had honored him, and it would be a dishonor to Potiphar for Joseph to sleep with Potiphar's wife. But even greater than that, Joseph says, it would be a great wickedness and a sin against God. So Joseph basically points out to her, he says, "Look, your husband, my master Potiphar, has greatly honored me, and it would be an immense dishonor to him if I did this. But more than that, as great of a dishonor to him as this would be, more than that, it would be a sin against God." And as David wrote in Psalm 51, verse 4, ultimately, all sin is against God. But Joseph tells her this. This is a dishonor. This would be a dishonor to my master, and it would be a sin against God. But Potiphar's wife continues to tempt Joseph day after day. But the text says he would not listen. In fact, the text basically says he does everything he can to stay away from her. He tries everything possible to keep himself as far away from her as possible. But the text says, "But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house were there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, 'Lie with me.' But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, 'See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me. He fled and he got out of the house.'" So, Joseph is doing everything he can to stay far away from Potiphar's wife. But one day, Joseph shows up to do his work, and only Potiphar's wife is in the house. It seems, the text does not say this, so perhaps this is a bit of speculation on my part, but it almost seems as if this has been arranged. The text emphasizes no one else is in the house except Potiphar and except Joseph. How convenient for Potiphar's wife. And she tempts Joseph again, as she has done all along, but it seems this time she can be a little bit more forward. No one else is around. So she is able to be more forward in her advances on Joseph because now there's nobody in the house. But Joseph leaves his garment in her hand and runs out of the house. And at this point, Potiphar's wife calls out to the servants of the house and claims that Joseph tried to force himself upon her, which is amazing because how often in lies, in what is said, is what is being said actually the reverse of it is true. In truth, Joseph has tried to stay far away from Potiphar's wife. In fact, she is essentially forcing herself upon him, but she claims he's tried to force himself upon her. So then she laid up his garment by her until Potiphar came home, and she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought in among us came in to me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." Now, as soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. So Potiphar's wife holds on to Joseph's garment until Potiphar comes home, and she repeats the same story, the same lie, to Potiphar. She accuses Potiphar of causing the problem, that Hebrew slave that you brought here. Now, it's interesting. The text doesn't actually reveal who Potiphar is angry with here. Is he angry with Joseph? Is he angry with his wife? Is he just simply angry about the situation? I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit of all of that. To only be thrown into prison for supposedly sleeping with his master's wife, or trying to, was a relatively light penalty for this time. Had Potiphar really believed Joseph had done what he was accused of doing, Potiphar probably would have executed him. So it's sort of speculation here, but it seems as if Potiphar may not be completely convinced that Joseph has done what Joseph is accused of doing. Just, the text doesn't say that, but just sort of in what happens might imply Potiphar's not totally convinced that Joseph did this. The text says, though, he is still in prison, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made him succeed and made it succeed. So, despite being in prison, after being falsely accused, the Lord is still with Joseph. Psalm 105, verse 17 through 19, speaking back, telling of all that God has done, his wonderful works, Psalm 105, verse 17 through 19, refers to Joseph. It says, he sent a man before them into the land of Egypt, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. They hurt his feet with fetters, he was laid in irons, until the time that his word came to pass. The word of the Lord tested him. And so basically it's in this chapter about the wonderful works of God, it's talking about how Joseph, even in the suffering and the terrible things that he went through, such as being thrown in prison, being sold as a slave, God was working in this bad moment. Now, something that's possible here is that it's possible that this prison was under Potiphar's control. At the very least, the keeper of the prison learned of the Lord being with Joseph. And just as in Potiphar's house, the keeper of the prison let Joseph manage things, and he didn't look into anything Joseph handled. This is sort of amazing if you think about it. A prisoner is in charge of running the prison. Now, how often does that happen? But that's what's happened here. He doesn't look into anything Joseph handled. He knows that Joseph is going to do what's right. But we're also reminded that Joseph's success is due to the Lord being with him. So, as we wrap up Genesis 39, to me, that's one of the things that stands out in this chapter is how that God is with his people, no matter what the situation is. And the importance then of God's people remaining faithful to him, no matter what they go through. Because no matter what you go through, God is still with you. God is still able to work good through the bad things you go through, to bring about good through the bad things you go through, the suffering and the challenges you face. God is still able to accomplish his will and to bring about good through the things you're facing. God does not abandon his people, even when they feel all alone and abandoned, as Joseph must have felt in Egypt. God is still with him. And so as we continue, Lord willing, next time into Genesis chapter 40, Joseph is still going to be in prison, but a chain of events is going to happen that is ultimately going to lead to Joseph being brought out of prison, brought out of the chains and shackles of prison to being elevated to one of the most prominent positions in Egypt. Kind of that whole process gets started in the next chapter. So look forward to studying that with you next time. But until then, I hope you have enjoyed studying Genesis chapter 39 with me, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.